So here's a little secret. My presentation is so much better after a drink. So if you haven't gotten something, please get something. It'll be much better, I promise you. Thank you, Pete. I really appreciate MoDev. So my son, he loves to tinker. So he loves to take things apart and then put it back together. And of course, he uses a generous amount of glue and mishmash of tape. Well, he happens to come towards me when I was working on preparing the speech. He says, "Hey, Dad, what are you working on?" I said, "Son, I'm going to be preparing this talk that I'm going to give on how IoT can fix problems." He says, IoT, huh? Does that stand for instead of tape, Dad? I said, "Yes, son, it stands for instead of tape." Exactly. So why is the Internet of Things such a hot topic these days? I mean, after all, these technologies have been around for years, right? Well, in my talk, I want to tell you about why now, what we can expect in the future, and what does this mean for all of you? So I'm going to tell you a little story. Probably heard about Malcolm Gladwell, correct? He's a best-selling author, and he tells a story about this shipping magnate, Malcolm McLean. And McLean is a child of the Great Depression. And at age 16, he drops out of school to work at a gas station. Probably not something we would recommend. Well, he eventually made a name for himself in the trucking industry. Now, most of us, we kind of take for granted how ocean freight containers are shipped from one country to another. But back in the 1950s, the shipping industry was very inefficient. Matter of fact, the process of loading cargo onto ships and to taking them off ships was time-consuming. And as a result, it was incredibly expensive. Well, McLean had this vision. He had a vision of turning the back of a trailer, because remember, he came from the trucking industry, in such a way that containers can easily slide on and off. But there was one problem. You see, the ideal of using containers had been experimented for some 30 years, kind of like what we're seeing with the Internet of Things. But the problem was that, as you can imagine, these containers are heavy. They're bulky, they're cumbersome, all of which drove up the cost of handling cargoes. Now, one of the critical conditions to McLean's success was the use of another technology borrowed from another sector. And that's something for entrepreneurs to keep in mind is sometimes the innovation doesn't happen right here. It actually happens adjacently. Look to them. So he recognized that these lumber cranes were capable of picking up these massively heavy lumber, and he thought maybe this could solve our problem because the current cranes that we're using for shipping isn't cutting it. So he applied these lumber cranes to load these containers and to unload it, place it on trains and trucks. And it worked. But it took some 30 years for all these preconditions to come to a point of maturity before this could work. Everything from railroad, port, ships capable of handling the stackable containers, to now, finally, the cranes that could actually pick up the weight of these containers. Well, the wearables and the Internet of Things are no different. But why now? Well, because the stars are finally starting to align. Everything from cloud computing, big data, mobile computing, 3G, 4G LTE, to lower cost of hardware, to finally miniaturization. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Really exciting stuff. I'm going to tell you a little story. My daughter is a thumbsucker. And if you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. And we knew that it was a problem when one day we were driving, and we heard this terrifying noise coming from the back. I looked at my wife. I said, "What's going on?" Though for sure something awful had happened. So I looked through the rearview mirror, and guess what I see? I see our sweet little child sucking on her thumb, twirling her hair, and amazing talent, right? And her finger got stuck in her hair, and she couldn't get it out. Of course, the hardest part is I couldn't laugh. Well, we tried everything from hot sauce to thumb guards, pictures from the internet of kids with crooked teeth. Nothing worked. It took age, peer pressure, and finally the incentive of ice cream to work. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Same thing with the Internet of Things. All right, so what does this mean in terms of the future? What can we expect? Well, in order for me to answer that question, we need to first look at the preconditions leading up to the IoT disruption. So I'm going to name a few things. Keep it very simple, but hopefully powerful. One of those preconditions is that the future of M2M will allow for these sensors to get to a point where they will have powerful embedded processors capable of handling advanced computing processes. That means that someday these sensors that we call IoT will be actually smarter and faster than the PCs of today. Another precondition is memory. So we can anticipate that over time, that memory RAM capacity will only grow, allowing to support ample M2M communication, machine to machine, and also your personal area network data storage for your individual private data. Then you have Wi-Fi. OpenWireless.org initiative encourages others to share the Wi-Fi. And according to the research, most locked wireless networks sit idle for much of the day. And that can be better harnessed, better utilized, while still giving the router owner priority when needed. And for guest users, their links can be encrypted using a protocol called EAP-TLS, the equivalent of HTTPS for security. Then you have Li-Fi. Li-Fi, what's Li-Fi? Well, if you've been keeping up, you know that Li-Fi is referring to the ability for two-way network to turn any light fitting with an LED bulb into an internet access point. It uses the visible light spectrum instead of the typical radio frequencies to communicate. And Li-Fi can be ubiquitous, provides high-speed wireless access that offers higher safety, higher security, higher data density than Wi-Fi, including the ability to eliminate unwanted external network intrusion. So pretty powerful stuff. Now, yesterday I was really excited when Steve from Bluetooth SIG mentioned mesh networks. Mesh networks are essentially peer-to-peer decentralized networks that are created by daisy chaining your phone. So essentially your phone becomes a router to nearby phones using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. Well, that's really powerful if you really think about what this means. It means that with every node, every device, it creates a more powerful network, this ad hoc network. And everyone that joins this mesh network creates an extension of the internet. They cannot be controlled by a central organization. There's no single IP to block. That's part of the reason why governments can't shut them down. And I'm so glad that Homeland Security people have gone. So apps such as FireChat, standards such as multi-peer connectivity, Wi-Fi P2P, these have been used in the recent Hong Kong protests and other places. Right. So what does this all mean? When you take all these preconditions and more, and I just highlighted just a few, it creates something incredibly amazing. So in totality, the implications are significant. It has the potential to disrupt telecom carriers. And I actually spoke to an executive, the former president of SK in Korea, and I told him this. Are you aware that mesh networks could potentially displace you guys or take away a big portion of revenue? He says, no, I didn't know that. He says, we don't have smart people like you. Anyways, you have to drink a little bit more. Presentation gets better. So anyways, so everything from disrupting telecom to the ability to actually harness this IoT network for supercomputer processing, ability to be able to shift consumer data ownership from the cloud service providers to your personal area network or your private cloud, all the while driving down the cost of accessing data communication. Really, really powerful stuff. Now, today's 3G, 4G LTE, network architecture requires that every mobile data must go through the carrier's access point network, APN, to connect through the internet. Well, guess what? They're in for a surprise because with the expected projection of IoT sensors and wearables, we can anticipate that people like yourselves and other executives and entrepreneurs will question the current paradigm. They have to. And researchers will continue to explore other approaches, communication approaches, that's going to potentially run in parallel or bypass the internet altogether by facilitating this peer-to-peer communication between wireless sensor network clusters. And then for us, as more of us choose to opt in to allow our personal area networks to communicate with the broader wireless sensor networks, communication can start to happen between these nodes without actually having to go through the internet. Really powerful stuff, exciting stuff. In Gartner's recent report, they talked about computing everywhere. Context-rich systems, where people will come to expect computing just about anywhere. Imagine what that means. I mean, that's really exciting stuff. You know, we come from this old days, right, of the big ERP install. So if you've been in IT or ICT for the last couple of decades, you know that these ERP systems are multi-million-dollar IT projects. Well, now we're starting to shift away from that to cloud ERP. Well, what I anticipate is that we're going to go from the ERP to EAI at the enterprise level. Let me explain. Most of you in this room probably have used a CRM system, right? What do you hear from the sales guys? That they love it? No, they hate it. They hate the fact that they have to enter all this data and upkeep it. But in order for management to be able to have visibility into the sales pipeline, the opportunities and activities, salespeople or their assistants have to enter that information into the system. But what I'm going to tell you is that all of that is about to change. In the not-too-distant future, people come to expect that we should be able to interface with our enterprise tools via our smart glasses, watches, via projection, screens inside our cars. More so that these systems need to be smarter, meaning it should be able to take notes for us in meetings, be able to distinguish important points versus sound bites. Face detection systems integrated into EAI should be able to tell or gauge your emotions and be able to check for congruence with your words. Voice analysis systems should be able to detect your emotions behind the spoken words. And let's say you're covering a multinational account where it has many, many regions. Well, your users are going to come to expect that EAI system will be able to take all that disparate and siloed information and make sense of it all. So let me give you an example. Let's say that your Singapore office receives an RFP for a pretty sizable RFP for your storage or networking products. Well, your local team doesn't have visibility into the client's bigger strategy. They just see an order. EAI should be able to take all the activities across all the regions and generate insights about the bigger picture so that it better positions your RFP not only for the Singapore office, but for the bigger account, for the clients. Are you with me? Now, at Amyx and McKinsey, we do more than just ask tough questions about the future wearables and Internet of Things. We also test our hypotheses and put into action. So we're actually working with some of the leading wearable startups and research institutions to bring something called Wearable Emotion Sensing Platform to brand engagement. We're calling it Brand Emotions. It means that retailers can actually know exactly what a customer is interested at a given moment when they're actually physically there in the store, real time. It means that hotels can more concretely measure their customers' overall experience as they interact with the hotel staff, enjoy the spa, eat at the restaurants. It means that film companies can start to measure a pilot before committing to full production to gauge the probability of success. So from live events, festivals, cultural experiences, we can start to quantitatively know how the participant feels about their experience. We're working with a startup called Element. Element is a high-end wearable jewelry startup, and they've received some tremendous fanfare and attention from the luxury and fashion industries. And we're working with them to actually bring this technology to fashion shows. So imagine everybody at the fashion show being equipped with some sensor devices, and as these models come in and out, we can actually start to gauge what the reaction is from biometrics and other things. And that's why I was so excited about Peter Lee's demo yesterday, as all of you were, of his burpees. All right. So let me just share one story, and I'll transition and wrap this up here. Maybe some of you can relate to what I'm about to share. I have a daughter who loves to talk. And the amazing thing is she's able to do this without breathing. I don't know how she does it. My son, on the other hand, it's like pulling teeth to get him to share. I ask him, hey, how was your day, son? It was good. Okay, great. Can you tell me a little bit more? Yeah, Dad, sure. It was a fine, good day. Okay. Let me try a different tactic. Let me ask him a specific question. What was the most interesting thing that happened at school today, Dad? Son? He says, Dad, there's this girl in my class, really weird. She chases this boy around the courtyard every day, pins him down to the ground, and kisses him right on the lips. I said, really? He says, yeah, Dad. I said, what do you do about it? He says, I yelled to Johnny, Johnny, she's coming, run! Oh, well, after that, I just stopped asking him about his day. All right, so what's the takeaway? What does it mean for you, the executives, you, the entrepreneurs? Well, it means that IoT is not going to happen in this single leap, like I had spoken to some of you. Rather, it's going to happen in this gradual series of innovation. So for the short term, the focus is going to be on industrial sensors, using existing technology, right? So in this stage of sensing things, M2M are going to passively transmit data to servers. Then you're going to have the platform and services layer that's going to act as a glue to bring all these sensors together. Now, in parallel, things will continue to become miniaturized. So that means that it's playing at the nano level, woven into clothes, woven into building materials, into the very DNA of physical assets. And as we go from sensing things to automated things, it means that M2M sensors can begin to actually work with one another to execute a series of tasks. This is the workflow and automation stage. Let's say you have a meeting across town. Your EAI senses that you're coming downstairs and you're heading to your meeting. It sends a signal to your driverless car, and I'm talking a little bit futuristic, but it actually pulls up to the front of the building. It's already taken the address from your calendar and put into GPS. As you step into the car, your windshield gets projected with the client's profile, meeting minutes and action items from the last meeting, and today's agenda. So by the time you arrive at your destination, you are fully briefed. You have all your presentation, you have all your files ready to share in the cloud. Pretty exciting stuff about what we can imagine. After automated things come AI things. This is where machines begin to think for themselves. They learn over time. They understand context. And they start to self-administer tasks on our behalf without being explicitly programmed. Now, it doesn't mean that these things become sentient by any means. It just means that they become smarter, more intelligent. Now, some of you may be a bit nervous about what you're going to hear, but in the future, we can anticipate that human capital will be supplemented with robotic and AI capital. We humans will not have a monopoly on innovation because we will be assisted by machines. Now, what does this, again, mean for you, the entrepreneurs? It means that at every stage of the IoT maturity life cycle, there are going to be opportunities. Okay? You don't want to develop too early. You don't want to develop too late. It has to be appropriate for the stage of the maturity life cycle. And the opportunities are going to be massive because we're just starting to scratch the surface in terms of the kind of possible use cases that we can see. on my finishing note, at the heart of the matter, what we're talking about is the velocity of innovation, the ability to distribute and to equalize knowledge. And just as we've seen with the internet and mobile, wearables and the Internet of Things has the potential to drive down the cost of accessing and sharing information while disrupting innovation itself. So that game-changing knowledge isn't just held by just a handful of people, but it becomes available to just about every human being on Earth, regardless of their background or their privilege. And this is what the IoT is all about. Thank you.